well. As Rosena's talking, you're just welcome to drop them in the chat. I think we seem to have most of the people we were expecting today. So thanks so much to all of you for coming, and thanks, Rosena, so much for coming to join us here at Scientists for Labour.
My pleasure. Always happy to do that. And no, it's really great to be here. Do you want me to kick off?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So obviously it's been a crazy few months, hasn't it, for everyone? Life as we know it has changed hugely. We've gone from kind of communicating through the deputy leadership campaign to then communicating about our thoughts at the start of this crisis, to now finding ourselves, a couple of months into the whole lockdown thing and the social distancing, where life for us has really changed hugely. And I think for me, it's been a massive learning curve. Obviously the deputy leadership race came to an end, and I was really thrilled, and quite unexpectedly came runner up. And so Keir brought me into the shadow cabinet, which has been a new experience for me, because obviously it's a seat at the top table of really getting to grips with what's going on and being part of the high level discussions about taking the party forward. But more interestingly, at this point, really, the focus has been on the COVID crisis and how we navigate that. And obviously being a doctor and having a science background, I've had a large role to play in informing colleagues and in trying to hold the government to account, really. And some of you will have seen, I had an exchange with Matt Hancock a couple of weeks ago, where he basically told me to mind my tone, and I think he found the content of what I had to say difficult, which shows the power of just being able to bring messages from the front line from a place of experience. And I think uniquely placed in this crisis are people who understand science and who understand medicine and understand what it's like working on the front line. And I think I've been really clear, particularly as it's Mental Health Awareness Week, and when we're really thinking about how people's mental health have been affected, that I actually define frontline not as just being sort of NHS and care workers, but really the front line are all the people who suffer with the greatest inequalities, as we know, often get paid less than basic, living wage, and are working at our checkouts in our supermarkets, driving our buses, cleaning our streets still, removing our bin rubbish, delivering our letters. These are the front line. And people have felt really scared in the last couple of months. The whole lack of PPE has been a joke. People have felt as though when they go to work, what are they bringing home to their families? People have had people begging them not to go to work for fear of their own lives. So I've spoken to many people who've been, had their kids in tears and their partners and their families in tears, going, please just don't go to work. You might catch COVID. It's been a real palpable fear. And I'm sure that, in your questions later, it will kind of come out my thoughts on how things were handled thus far. But I think the overriding feeling that I have from having sort of worked on the front line and from seeing what I've seen through sort of looking at all the details through a magnifying glass every single day with my team, as part of the health team and part of the shadow cabinet, has been that underlying rumbling feeling that turned into a giant train running through my brain, which is the noise of the fact that this could have been avoided. So many of these deaths could have been avoided. And of course, there is no one that can sit here and say, look, a Labour government would have got it all right and no one would have died. That's an impossible thing to say. There are always going to be lives lost. We have to be able to acknowledge that. But if you look at how we compare to the rest of the world, if you look at things like the tracking and tracing system was scrapped on the 12th of March. If you look at the fact that the government have constantly been saying we've been following the science, and I've been like a dog with a bone asking for the evidence, and then the evidence transpires that actually we were right all along, and things like the 14-day WHO recommendation for self-isolation should have been adopted instead of 7, and things like that. It's been quite a frustration, because now we're heading into June and the government are patting themselves on the back about conducting more tests, but we had our first patient with COVID-19 in January. We've got nothing to be patting ourselves on the back about. And as we come out of this, as we see the numbers of people dying dwindle, we cannot forget that over 35,000 deaths have happened, you know, not to mention the countless lives ruined by even people that survived having protracted stays in intensive care, what that would have done for their mental health, their family's mental health. And of course, on top of all of this, I mean, I'd be so interested to hear from you as scientists, but we have a government who now appear to be blaming the scientists for everything, because you guys said on this call, and I've quoted it a million times, on this call that we had at the start of this all, you said that you were worried about the language. It was looking as though they were setting everything up to, if things went wrong, to blame the scientists. You guys said that, and I said you said that, and that is what they're doing now, isn't it? It's like, oh well, wasn't us. It was the scientists, like this bunch of people, and Sage. They haven't published who you know actually is in Sage, and I can just see Michael Harriet said he's absolutely right. You know, 35,000 deaths in hospital, but yes, more like 55,000 if you include care homes, but also even more than that. And I was going to say this later, but I'll raise it now. Even more than that, if you look at the numbers of deaths of people in hospital who were not picked up by ambulances, that's a piece of work I'm doing at the moment, trying to get some answers, because we know, well, I know through my contacts in the pre-hospital world, that so many ambulances were told not to go to people that were in cardiac arrest because they weren't going to make it anyway, they're probably COVID positive. So some of these things we're going to have to really look at. Death toll is going to be phenomenal out of the other side of this, and I think there are many lessons to be learned. And you know, vaccination, whether we get one, how far we are with the trials, we have to make sure that if we do have one that works, that we actually make sure that it's rolled out fairly and equitably across our communities. We need to work out how the antibody testing thing might have, you know, if people procure private antibody tests, are they going to be mandated to put their results somewhere? There are lots of things going to come out of this, but ultimately the failure to get on top of the testing was down to Public Health England wanting to take ownership of all of the tests, and them and the government and them choosing not to engage in other companies. Because I wrote to Matt Hancock in March with a, you know, saying, who are you engaging? I knew there was a list of 7 companies in the UK who could have provided a testing service. So ultimately, just to sort of summarise on this, we're in a pretty bleak place when you look at the numbers of deaths that have occurred. We're in a very bright place if you look at how our scientific community have come together at this time. I mean, working absolutely round the clock to try and find ways forward. There are loads of lessons to be learned. I think there will need to be an inquiry ultimately, and I think we need to make sure that scientists aren't blamed for government failings on the other side of this. But I'm really happy to be here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming along to talk to us. I think we all really appreciate you taking the time out. So the first question that I had is, you've obviously had 2 roles in this crisis that most people probably would never have. One working, you know, doing shifts in A&E or in hospitals, and the other being a politician at the dispatch box, holding the government to account. How has that sort of been for you? How have you found the experience of having to do 2 things which on the surface are completely different, and both probably, I can imagine, incredibly taxing?
I think I put a lot of pressure on myself for a while, because I felt I was quite uniquely placed to be able to talk from the front line and as a voice of experience. I also have a master's in public health, you see, and I have a lot of colleagues in public health. And so when they were talking about the science behind some of their decision making at the beginning, I felt as though I felt like a bit of a one-woman army in this fight against their bullshit. And I found it quite all-encompassing, really. I just felt like saying, you're wrong. And then on the PPE stuff, when they were saying, oh, everyone's got their PPE, I was in a position to be able to say, actually, they don't have it. And I know that because I've just gone and done a shift. And so I think that unique combination of those roles, initially I put a lot of pressure on myself to sort of get those messages out, but they got out, and it was good that they got out. And then I think I found really that I separated the 2. When I was working, I was just me, Rosena, the doctor, the family person. And in fact, I didn't like it if people said, "Oh, aren't you that MP?" or "Do I recognise you?" Because I didn't. That wasn't what defined me. It was just being the doctor that I'd been for so many years. And the hardest stuff for me actually weren't the A&E shifts, which I did at the beginning. It was the Nightingale stuff, the family support liaison teamwork, where I was asked to come on board by a colleague who used to run HEMS, the Helicopter Emergency Medical Service in London, and he brought on a bunch of people who were very familiar with critical care, but also like very experienced in giving bad news, because families were not able to come and see their loved ones. And so what we used to do is phone them and talk through what was going on, right down, from these are the machine settings, that's what it means. We are turning your father onto his front today. And then things like, he's not going to make it, and then he's died, and those things were very stressful. And then we were able to sometimes invite family in if they weren't self-isolating, and then you had to choose one person to go and say goodbye, and then you would put full PPE on, go into the intensive care unit with them, and just watch their hearts break. And it was, I used to come home and cry on the way home, and it was hard. And then I was really disappointed when I approached Matt Hancock at the dispatch box. Like any other politician should have the right to, any other any politician has the right to speak, has the right to stand up and ask their question. And I felt like I was asking the question on behalf of everybody that had felt as though there had been preventable deaths. And then to have it dismissed just because he didn't like the content. People say, "Oh, was he being sexist? Was he being racist? Was he being this? Was he being that?" I didn't dwell on that. I just quite frankly thought, what a waste of time. He didn't like my content. And so the way to deal with that was to just try and belittle me in the process. And that was to his detriment at the end of the day. I mean, ridiculous. I got such an outpouring of support and thousands of followers saying, "She just asked a very simple question from the front line, and this is how," and I said, I will not watch my tone, actually. Got something important to say, and I've got just as much a right as anybody else to ask this. And in doing so, I realised that that's what all the public wanted asking as well. So it's been a unique experience. But also I have learned the hard way that when you step out of your political role into another environment, not everyone shares your politics. And if they don't share your politics, they do sometimes question your motives for even being there, which is another hard lesson that I learned this time.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty tough experience. And I think we all have an enormous amount of respect for you for doing that. I can't, as I said, I'm sure most of us couldn't imagine what it would be like to do both of those things. On the note that you said sort of first about being someone who can walk between the two worlds, as it were, talk science to politicians, but also talk politics to scientists like you're doing today, how do you think we as a group should be doing that? How do we feed scientific advice in and hold the government to account on their questioning of the science when, you yourselves don't have access to the stuff that SAGE is producing, even now, 2 months after this really all kicked off?
Yeah, it's deeply frustrating. It's like they decided which scientists were going to be their scientists du jour, and that only their advice and recommendations would suffice. And there were many scientists, there still are many scientists around the country who are like, "Hold on a minute, you're talking about the scientists, we're scientists as well, and we can tell you're chatting rubbish." Mm-hmm. But I try to frame it around the language of transparency in order to sort of think, okay, I want an answer to my questions here. I'm not going to point the finger to start with and say, "Oh, I disagree, you're doing this wrong." I was like, okay, fine. If you're following the science, can you show us then? Can you be transparent about the science that you have? I remember saying, can you tell me respectfully, I'm asking you respectfully, out of interest, how is the virus pathogenesis different in the UK compared to the rest of the world? Knowing full well it isn't, right? So how is it that the pathogenesis of disease is so different here that we don't need to adhere to the recommendation, all the papers published, all of the work that's gone on around the world to prove that you're still infectious for 14 days after the symptoms stopped, actually. And here we were saying, yeah, bowl on out 7 days after they start. How many people got sick because of that advice? Many, I would suspect. So it's hard because you basically, just want to stand there and say, you're a liar, you're a liar. My mates will tell you as well, we know, you're chatting rubbish. But you can't. You have to actually temper your language and rein it in. And so I thought, well, how do I navigate this difficult line? Because it is difficult, because you do have to think about the fact you want to bring people on board. You want to bring your communities on board with you. And at a time of national crisis, you can't make it look like you're scoring political points, even though you want to challenge the government and you know they're doing a rubbish job. So you think, we've got to frame it carefully. So yeah, so I was very clear with the show me the evidence, show me the evidence, show me the evidence. And then look, they're not showing me the evidence. And then more and more people jumped on top of that, which was good. It's kind of snowballed.
Yeah, I guess we have this odd situation now where Labour has, Keir Starmer adopted our call for all the sage advice to be publicised, but it's very difficult to force the government to do that at this point, obviously. So what would you say is the most effective way to continue challenging, given that, as you've experienced, they're just flat out refusing to provide the level of detail that, by their own guidelines, their committee should be releasing?
I think it's important to keep asking the questions and have on record that you're asking the questions, because I asked some things way back when, and then when I comment on something now, people say, oh, but where were you then asking it? And then we just direct people to the same question from 2 months ago. Keep asking the questions so that when the time comes, when the day of reckoning comes, you can say, we have been asking this all along, X, Y, and Z. And, document your questions as you go along. Keep a file of the questions that you have to give to us, in order to fuel our arguments going forward. And it is highly frustrating. It's highly frustrating. And also the way the virtual parliament has been working and the way we have to work in parliament, nothing is given the due scrutiny that it needs. Like, normally, if there was a statement being made, backbench colleagues could stand up and ask questions all the time, and then you would feed the same question to all the backbenchers, so whoever got picked would ask that question, and then it could all be on record. So trying to get things on record in Hansard is good. Feed us questions, send me questions if you want to think of some together as a cohort. Send me a few that I can try and look through and maybe submit as written questions to the government, so that we can then get official answers. Just the more evidence we can get, the better. And I think, sadly, in the absence of answers, that's the best we can do at the moment.
No, that sounds like a good plan. And just so everyone else is aware, if you have questions, there's someone who's not at the call tonight, because we're trying to put together a database of all the questions that we've asked and the responses, so that we can do follow-ups. And I think the hope is that we'll be able to start passing them to you a bit more efficiently. The final question on my end was about diversity in politics, but in its broadest sense. So, obviously you would say, that you have an opinion which is perhaps informed by being a doctor, but also, I guess, being a woman in politics, if not in the Labour Party's MPs, in the MPs in the whole of the House of Commons, is quite unusual. Similarly, in being someone from an ethnic minority. So do you feel that that's something that has really allowed you to give a different perspective on this? Or, as you say, do you think that it's something that people like Matt Hancock have tried to use as a way of dismissing what you're asking quite legitimately?
I think, we've got a long way before certain politicians feel there is a place for people like me in the chamber. But I don't ever dwell on that. I just think, well, I'm here and they have to deal with it, and they should underestimate me at their peril. Just things like his reaction towards me just 2 weeks ago. Overnight, I got 45,000 new followers on Twitter, which means that's 45,000 more people to hear my messages when I challenge him. And that was simply by saying, no, I'm not going to watch my tone. I want the government to succeed. I want us to save lives, but I've got a legitimate question about avoidable deaths, and I'm not going to be quiet about it. I think where my mixed heritage really helps in this, I've got to say as pretty significantly, I think, is in debunking some of the arguments around why the BME community have been disproportionately affected. Because when they start talking about, well, you know, Black and Asian people, just their receptors in their lungs might be different, and their comorbidities are such that way more of them die than anybody else. You know, well, actually, we know that comorbidities are multiple, plentiful, and this again is where the science and the medicine and the mixed heritage comes in. But you know, well, actually, yes, more Asian and Afro-Caribbean people have hypertension, but more Caucasian people have cancer, and that is also considered to be something that puts you in a high risk category. You know, autoimmune diseases, all sorts of things that make you susceptible, which you would know if you have any scientific or medical background. You know that just somebody standing up in a press conference and go, well, we have to look if they're more susceptible. No, let's call it what it is. Let's say that when this happened, you did not send out material in languages that meant that everybody knew what was going on right from the outset. Let's talk about this inequality fueled issue whereby people from the poorest households who are disproportionately BME, if you look at the makeup of our whole population, are the ones who are still going out having to drive the buses unprotected, at the outset, driving the buses unprotected, serving at the checkout counters, working as carers. And many people were saying from the BME community, and it's come out in some hospitals, I can't give you the details of that at the moment, but because I'm just not allowed, but that many staff, cleaning staff, nursing staff, doctors were asked to go and do things that were unsafe over and above their non-BME colleagues. So when you know this and you're a medic and you're a Labour person and you understand how inequalities work, when somebody tells you, well, you know, all these poor Black and Asian people have died because their receptors must be different and we're just doing the research on that, you're like, well, really? And, you know, there has been some research that's already been done that shows that that's rubbish. But I think it being in this position, it feels like a position of strength, because if I wasn't of mixed heritage, if I wasn't able to say, hold on a minute, stop saying that Asians don't care about social distancing and all hang around each other's houses anyway, that's just not true. You'd have a whole different level of credibility if you're able to say that from being from that community, if that makes sense. Because there was a lot of blame gaming. I was having people telling me that, and one of the real concerns for me, I've just got to be honest, was about Trevor Phillips being brought on by the government, because he is, you know, currently suspended for Islamophobia. And some of the language that people were using about, well, you know, Muslims are just not paying attention, they're all going to the mosques. Like, the mosques were closed down. They're all going to the mosques, they're all going to each other's houses, and they just don't care about social distancing. That kind of narrative in the world that we live in, which has a lot of far-right activism at the moment in this country, needs to really be curbed. And so, yes, sorry, long answer to a short question, but I think I am uniquely placed to be able to sort of talk from an issue of authority on that subject as well.
No, thank you. That's really useful. And like you say, we're doing a piece on the moment, which I hope everyone will be able to read in the next few weeks on some of these issues surrounding people from BAME backgrounds and whether there is medical evidence to support one thing or another, or how much of it can be put down to sort of structural discrimination in society. So I hope that will be useful as well.
Or a mix of everything.
Exactly,
you know,
as is probably
like
the
no
case.
one is saying, I mean, look, there could be some physiological predisposition, but it's not the whole reason that so many, you know, people have died. It's not rocket science to realize that that's rubbish.
Yeah, so to move on now, that's enough of me talking. I'm going to start pulling questions out of the chat. So if you haven't put your question in there already, please do feel free to do that. So the first two, one from Paul and from Dennis, that we're going to combine. The scientists on SAGE have obviously agreed to not have their deliberations be made public as much as we would like. Is that something that you can understand? And what would your take be on the work that David King is doing to set up this independent SAGE, which is basically doing everything as openly as possible?
Gosh, I think it's terrible. I don't understand why Sage wouldn't want to be open and transparent. I think it's because people like Dominic Cummings are on it that is the case. I am not sure that all the scientists on there would have agreed to it, and in fact, some of them have said that they actually advocated for openness and transparency. I mean, look, as a scientist, you wouldn't you? Really? Anyone that's ever done any research, I mean, I've probably collectively done 2 or 3 years of proper research in my life, which doesn't compare to the amount that you guys would have done. However, during that time, what I do know is you want your peers to be able to peer review what you're doing. That's why it's called a peer review. I mean, that's the whole point. You want best practice. You want to be engaging with the scientific community around the world. You want to be open and say, look, we feel this piece of advice is good based on this level of evidence coming out of that centre where they've had an N of whatever. The study's been powered properly. It's perfect. It's good. We're going to adopt it. Let's be open about it. You're not going to want to, you obviously want that, you want your findings to be credible, right? So I just feel instinctively that that any scientist, like, why would you not want that to be able to, yeah, of course there are people for privacy reasons and journalistic reasons, they don't want to be hounded, but I just personally believe that that the government wanted to have this group of scientists almost in this bubble somewhere over here that people could just believe existed, that were coming up with all this advice, and the government were just following the advice of these scientists that nobody could see. That's just rubbish. And I just think, yeah, the independent stage where everything is transparent and open, and accountability is the key word here. There's no accountability with what we have going on at the moment. But I think, I mean, ultimately, we will miss a trick if we don't push for an inquiry, and I'm sure we'll have to get one eventually. And then I think we'll find that the scientists didn't necessarily give the advice that was proclaimed that they did.
No, unfortunately, it sounds like that might be made the case. So building on questions from lots of people, we've obviously seen a lot talked about in the last few days about tracking and tracing and testing. So we've got this NHS app, which is going to be rolled out, but lots of concerns about the security, the privacy, whether it actually works, about whether people will take it up, and about how the government will integrate that into a strategy. Do you have a take on that you think it would be sensible for Labour to be pushing on, given that there's so much uncertainty about all of these things at the moment?
I actually be interested to know what some of you guys think about this. I think security, data security, is a huge thing, and I think it's almost a bit late for this app. If we'd have had the app at the beginning, so that people could contact trace successfully, then there would have been real value to it. I know that the argument is supposed to be, well, it will help us stop a second wave. But I mean, the numbers of people that would need to take it up in order for it to act as enough of a deterrent for a second wave, or to stop a second wave happening, I just don't think we'll get those numbers. And I also think, ever more when we need to be worried about, like cybersecurity and tech safety, I'm not sure that that's the best way to go about things. But I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. This is something I'd love to hear back from you guys, and what you think about it. But I just personally, my initial thoughts are the number of people that would have to take it up, it's a bit too late, and we've got to think about safety.
Yeah, I guess this is an excellent, not all of these talks can be interactive, but if people want to put thoughts about the contact tracing app, it's probably easier just to do them in the chat. But I think we had our contact tracing report, which came out at the weekend. So if people have expertise in that, please do feel free to drop your thoughts in there. Whilst people are sort of doing that, What do you think about the current attitude the government is taking to the reopening of schools? So we're planning on releasing a report on that tomorrow, and we're really struggling to find concrete evidence to back up what they're saying is best practice.
Yeah, gosh, I really hesitant about that. And I answer that as a politician, but I answer that as a mother as well. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I have to make the decision about whether I want to send my 5-year-old. I'm going to actually whisper because she's a bit worried about it, about whether to send my 5-year-old back to school in a week. And I think it's an utter shambles that we didn't take this decision together with our devolved nations. It is ridiculous that we are planning something in contrast to Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And safety has to be the key in all of this. Everything has to be enshrined in safety. And I have got to say, I'm with the unions and the BMA on this one. I struggle to see how you can get a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds to effectively, safely, socially distance, A, on a practical level, but B, without it also affecting their mental health. Can you imagine? I'm really worried. Sorry, I don't want to get upset because we've had a few conversations about this. I'm really worried about having to go back to school and stand in a plot of playground 2 meters away from everybody else. I'd rather keep her at home and keep homeschooling her until it's safe for her to go back. This is my worry. And there are parents who are feeling so conflicted over this, because they're like, why would the Prime Minister ask us to do something if he didn't know it was safe? Again, the science, where is the science? We've got no evidence that schools feel ready. In fact, what I'm hearing from heads is that they don't. And ultimately, once you have one child in the household going back to an environment where they could pick up the virus, that is a perfect storm for a second wave. And also there's things as well, like, grandparents who've not been allowed to see their little ones. Once their kids go back, if they're not in a safe environment, they risk being able to spread it to their grandparents, which means, if they're back at school before they're ready, they won't be able to spend time with their grandparents over summer in a way that is safe, because we know that there is a lag period when you can be infectious for up to 2 weeks. So I'm worried about it. I don't think the government have thought it through. I think they've, and again as well, it's like, if you're saying you're doing it for the economy, or thinking you're doing it for the economy so that you can get parents back to work more easily because their children are in school, yet, I mean, in what dream world do people have multiple children that happen to be in reception year 1 and year 6? Like me, they could be in reception in year 2. It doesn't solve the problem of going back to work. So I think the mental health issues are the big ones as well to really think about. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are. I would struggle to see why we're doing things so differently to everybody else. Again, I'd want to know the science behind it. And I know that children are less likely to be super sick over it. I know there is a Kawasaki type illness that children can get. But people say, well, that's only a small percentage. But if that's your child, you only need it to be your child, and your life is turned upside down. So parents right now don't know whether they're coming or going. Some are feeling as though, well, school should never have been shut, and others are feeling as though they're sending their children to their death in a week. So I think as a Labour Party, though, and I said this in Shadow Cabinet meeting, whatever our messaging is ultimately over this, we've got to make parents feel that we're not judging them, whatever they do, either way. Because this is a very, very stressful time for parents. Very.
Yeah, thank you. I think.
Sorry about the strange whispering. It's just.
No, not at all. We can change the topic if you want.
No. It's fine. It's fine. It's just we've had discussions about it at home, and she's seen pictures of what the school playground might look like, and it worries her. And because reception, they've only spent a few months at school before lockdown ever, and then to go back and it be an environment that is so alien for them, what damage does that do to them? That's a real worry.
So there are a few comments in the chat about the contact tracing app. So I guess on this, I'm more than happy to invite people to speak. Adam, you've said something about the take up is going to be a problem. Do you want to come on and say a few words about that?
Yeah, why not? Cheers, Ben. Yeah, just to feed back to your questions, Rosena, I think the we've just written a report on contact tracing that we put online, and there's obviously a lot more in that. And if you've got the chance, you know, it is worth a read. But our kind of general finding was that the take-up that is predicted is probably a lot lower than the amount of take-up required for the app to be effective.
Right.
So the assumption is that you need 80% of people who own a smartphone to download the app, which translates as slightly over 50% of the population. The chance of 80% of smartphone users downloading any app is incredibly low. You know, Facebook doesn't have 80% of smartphone users, or any of the big social media apps. And then I think, you know, on top of that, the approach taken by the NHSX app, the current app in the UK, is a centralized data storage model. Now, the worry about the centralized data storage model is, A, you're assuming that you trust the government with your data, which some people may do that, lots of people won't do that. But also, and I think more importantly, you're assuming that you trust the data, trust the government not to be hacked. Yeah. So, you know, it's all very well, maybe I trust the government not to misuse my data, but if they're storing it in some central location, if somebody else breaks into that location and takes my data, then any malicious party has hold of that data all in one large package. So absolutely. Yeah, the story was we are very concerned about the contact tracing app.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Because again, just so you know, like the things that you tell me, I do feed into our health team meetings, and it helps inform our lines going forward. So these kind of conversations are invaluable, because I do go back and I say, well, look, scientist Flavour told me this and this. So thanks, I will feed that in. Thank you.
Liz, so I guess you've got a really interesting take here, being involved in science, but also I guess as a business. Do you want to maybe say something about what more you would like in terms of the data? I guess that's partly to do with the app, but also to do with testing.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm off mute now.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, right. So yeah, I'm a scientist, and you know, history and philosophy of maths is my science background. But at the moment, I'm actually a pub landlady. So yeah, also massively stressed about what's going to happen to my business and the ridiculous plans that I'm seeing coming out of government for what they think that I can do to control, you know, the spread within my business, to the point where I don't think I'm going to open this year. Yeah, there's no support for us, but don't worry, that's a conversation I'm having with Ed Miliband at the moment, so we'll pass on that one. But I think what we do need as business owners is that sort of data to say, actually, this is how, we've got no understanding within businesses about what's safe to do, what's not. We're being asked to produce risk assessments. How on earth am I supposed to, as a pub owner, produce that risk assessment? And I'm talking about as a pub owner who is also a scientist, who understands some of this.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I was picking up a point that you made saying it's too late for this sort of contact tracing to control the outbreak of the virus. However, I'd say it's got a really important place to play, that sort of local, and I agree with a lot of comments that it's got to be something done by humans, it's got to be something that's done locally. Yes. You know, all of that sort of problems that we've got about, you know, giving up our data, it's got to be a human local response to it. But, you know, how can we do that, have it backed up with some proper scientific data so that we actually really do understand the risks that we take by reopening our pubs? So that was a long ambling point, so I'll let someone else speak.
That's great.
Rishikesh, so sort of the professional telecoms take on this, might you want to say a few words about that?
Yes, sure. I mean, I think that one of the problems with the NHS contact tracing app is that Britain will end up using a system that is completely antithetical to the relatively decentralized system that other countries use. So if we are using contact tracing to try and aid people to get back to normality and actually do things like international travel and go to work and things like that, when British people travel abroad, they're not actually going to be able to use the app, and contact tracing simply won't work because it's not interoperable with another system when other countries are using an app that's completely different and not centralized like the NHS app is. So the question remains, why is Britain actually going along a different path? What's the scientific evidence behind that? And that isn't completely clear. It seems that perhaps there was some study by Oxford University suggesting that when your testing capacity is low, then it might be easier to stuff everything into a centralized system, because at that point it's easier for the government to be able to identify clusters and see, okay, very quickly, this is where outbreaks may be emerging. But that actually is not your ideal system, because it forces everyone to put their data and sacrifice privacy and put it in this centralized system, whereas the Apple Google system would just mean you can send alerts and receive messages on your phone. And so people would be more willing to do that. The fact is, if you don't have enough testing, then you're going to have to be forced to use a suboptimal system that is different from the rest of the world. And that's a particular problem.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rishikesh. I think it's safe to say there seem to be widespread concerns, Rosena. So,
yeah, just going back to Liz's point, actually, of course we need test, track and trace, but the human element of it is what's really important. And the Labour Party, we were saying that we need to involve local government. We need, I think, 50,000 local people to get involved in their communities. Is this sort of 18,000 people volunteering, and all the army, all the stuff that the government was saying? You know, the Labour Party was saying, let's focus on a coordinated response using our skills at local government level and get boots on the ground and do it that way.
thanks. That's probably a sensible take, but remains to be seen whether it's one that the government will choose to follow. So to change topic a little bit, we obviously saw at Prime Minister's questions yesterday the issue raised of NHS staff being being charged to use their own NHS. And a comment here from Nacho. Do you maybe want to come in, Nacho, about your own situation and how Brexit and being a European citizen is complicated matters to you?
Hi, Rosena. Thank you for everything.
Hi, Nacho.
I've been living in the UK for the past 4 years. But when the lockdown came, I was stranded in Spain, which is my country of origin. And again, I was planning to apply for. I have pre-settlement status. I could have applied for settlement status this September, but due to this thing, I will lose my window for opportunity of 6 months outside of the country. My question is, this is, I think, a problem that is more common than we may think. I know quite a few people in a similar situation to mine, and I was just wondering if the party can raise the matter to the government about like how this will affect the time requirements for settlement status or for applying for British citizenships, and now that it's very likely that we'll go for hard Brexit.
Gosh, are you in Spain now?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, I hope you and your family are all well.
Yes. Luckily for me, I'm in a region that was more or less untouched, but most of my family is in Madrid, which was worse than Lombardy, as you probably know. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what I'd really like you to do, if you can, in the chat? Can you put your contact details?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will get someone from my team to reach out. So I think it'd be really important to ask this question of the government, and I want to frame it the exactly correct way. I want to make sure I get all the details right. So perhaps my team can liaise with you, because you raise a really hugely important point. So thank you for that, and I definitely want to take that forward. So yeah, if you can pop that in the chat, and we will get in touch.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you for all that you do, and stay safe. And I hope you'll be able to come back.
Yeah, well, I hope the same.
Yeah. Oh, but it's so nice you're joining us from Spain. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I was involved with Labour since university. I'm in Scientists for Labour and in the committee. So I wanted to use the opportunity as well for these to raise this matter.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you did. Thank you. Put it in the chat and we'll get it sorted.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's great to see that Scientists for Labour is now an international organisation.
Yeah, we're going global, guys. We're going global.
So do you have a sort of a route which you think that all of us should be pushing the government on discharging NHS staff who are foreign born or, you know, don't have settled status to use the NHS? Because you must have colleagues who are in this position of having to pay potentially thousands of pounds for a privilege of using a service that they work for.
Yeah, it's awful. I think we just have to keep lobbying the government, keep being loud about it. Write to your MPs. Have you got? Well, you all have individual MPs. Sorry, I sometimes forget I'm not everybody's MP. Write to your individual MPs. Show them how seriously you take it. They will be feeling that as well. But you also may well have Conservative MPs. I know that Labour MPs are really sort of screaming and shouting about it. But write to your MPs. If you've got colleagues and friends that live where you do, get them to also write, because the pressure of MPs hearing from their community can be very great, which is why we're seeing a lot of Conservative MPs pushing for a return to Parliament, because their communities are saying, well, I don't understand why you guys aren't in Westminster. So they're basically doing things based on that. Or people are saying, well, we think schools should open, so then they're pushing to open schools because that's what they think their community want. So people do things very selfishly in their own interests. So sad as that is, the more noise you make to your MP, the more likely they are to lobby the government for the changes. And just keep making noise about it. Just keep embarrassing them over it. It's shocking.
Yeah, thanks. I think hopefully we'll see some of the Conservative MPs rebelling on that issue.
Oh, sorry. It has been U-turned though. It's just been U-turned. I just tweeted about it. Sorry. I meant in general on issues, but that one has been U-turned. I've tweeted about it not long ago. So spread that and embarrass them over it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
well, we'll chalk that up as a victory for Labour then, shall we?
Definitely.
All right, so I guess we've only got a few minutes left before the clap. We had one last slightly light-hearted request, which you're welcome to refuse, of course, especially if the kids are asleep. So as Matt Hancock told you to watch your tone, I'm sure many of us enjoyed actually watching your tone during one of the deputy leadership debates.
Oh no.
We were wondering whether you might be willing to give us a short rendition of a similar piece, as it were. But of course, if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Well, I've got my windows open and my kids awake, but I can't. I probably shouldn't. I'll give you one line, space related. All right.
Okay. Perfect.
Fly me to the moon and let me lay under the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I think that's a big thumbs up from me.
Only because it had the space background. So
yeah. I can tell you that spring on Mars at this year is lovely. So
I think you made me do that.
It's all right. We've asked Rupert Huck to rap in French before, so
Good.
Thanks so much.
I wish I'd known before. I would have had a better idea, and I would have been able to do it better. I was a bit like hushed in and out, but it's all good. Anything for you guys.
Thank you. That's probably about all we have time for today, but thank you so much again for joining us. I hope you still find the reports useful that are coming out.
Yes,
the team have been working incredibly hard, so there'll be a bunch over the long weekend as well. And to everyone listening, if you're not helping out yet, but you fancy helping out, just get in touch with us and I'm sure we can put you to work immediately.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Keep it all coming. Like we're all in this together. As I always say, you know, I'm just the person that stands at the box, but you guys give me the information I need to sort of pack those punches. So keep it coming.
All right.
And I just want to check. Did you put your our friend in Spain, Juan?
Yes, I did. It's I think the last message in the chat. I put my email there.
I can send it to you if that's easier, Rosena.
I'm just going to take a quick old school photo of it, because I do that with everything, just in case I don't lose it. Right, got it. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
It's a bit long.
It's got it. I've got you. I've got you. You last lived in Hounslow. So,
Yeah.
so was Rupert your MP?
And it was Ruth Cadbury. I was in Brentford and
Ruth
Isleworth.
Yeah. Brilliant. Right. Well, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
And see you soon. Take care. Bye.
All right, take care, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.